On today's episode, we have content creator Jess Bolton talking about living with her anxious dogs and coming at it from a client perspective. Jess, we would love to hear a little bit about you. So for our listeners and watchers, can you just give us a little bit of background for those who might not know who you are?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Jess and I'm a content creator on Instagram, an author and a podcaster. And I describe myself as the opposable thumbs behind the worried Whippet, who is my 10-year-old Whippet, Jess. She's a very anxious soul. And for the last 4 years or so, I've been telling her story through my Instagram account and connecting with other guardians of anxious dogs.
I love it. I love how you described yourself then, the opposable thumbs behind it.
Right, isn't
That's
it?
amazing. I love it. I love it. So, yes, so tell us a little bit about your journey then. What kind of led you to being that content creator for the Worried Whippet?
Well, when I started, we'd had Jess for about a year and we had accidentally bitten off more than we could chew with her. So we're her third home. She's had quite a complicated background and a lot of trauma. And we'd taken her on without really understanding what the implications of that would be. So we'd spent a year kind of muddling through it by ourselves as best we could. And when we got to the 1 year mark, her personality was really coming through. Like, it took a long time for her to start showing us who she actually was. I remember saying to my now husband, about a couple of weeks in, being like, this dog doesn't have a personality. Like, I didn't understand enough about the process of rehoming a dog to know that that was normal. So at about the 1 year mark, we realized that we had a sort of chronically anxious dog on our hands. And we wanted to connect with community, and Instagram was a really good way to do that. So I started sharing sort of posts and stories on there, and it just grew and grew. That was at the end of 2019, and at the start of 2020, we went into lockdown. And I think Jess's anxieties are so relatable. She's worried about things like leaving the house and meeting new people and being anywhere near the edge of her comfort zone. And I think suddenly that was very relatable for like the humans out there as well as the dogs. And it all just really took off.
Wow. Okay, then. So it sounds like from a guardian point of view then, so from owning and living with a dog that has all of these issues and struggles, how did that make you feel? Because I suppose a lot of our audience are on the opposite side in that they're the professionals trying to support people like yourselves with that type of dog. But I think it's really interesting that we've been talking about messaging a lot recently and trying to really make sure that we are speaking the same language as the people that we are ultimately trying to help. So from the flip side then, how has that felt for you as a guardian of a dog with all of these struggles?
So for me, I started from a point which is radically different from where I'm at now, and which I think will be familiar to lots of people and definitely to lots of professionals and dog trainers and behaviourists, etc., which is I had grown up with a family dog, but I had so little understanding, no understanding really of dog behaviour, of what to expect from having a dog of my own, especially like a complex dog. I'd done a lot of breed research. I knew what I wanted my life with a dog in it to look like.
Yeah.
I had no concept of how to get there, how different it could be, and really like what my responsibilities to this other being were. I'm just going to put myself on mute, sorry. So yeah, we were really starting from almost scratch, and we had to do a lot of learning very quickly. I think one of the things that characterized the start of our experience with Jess was that we weren't equipped to read her body language and her behavior and understand what she was telling us. So I think for a long time at the beginning, we were not meeting her needs, not understanding her needs, and putting her in situations that were distressing her and making her behavior worse. Unwittingly, like, we were well-meaning, but we just weren't equipped.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did that make you feel when you realized that those were the things that again, you were very unintentionally not supporting.
Well, it's gutting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really sad because you want to do the best for this animal that you love. We fell in love with her very quickly. So it's obviously sad looking back at that, but we've taken it very seriously since. We've done a lot of learning, and we now have a second dog, Otto, with a not dissimilar background. And it feels good to be able to take all of the learning that we've done with Jess and implement that, and know that we are well equipped and doing our absolute best this second time around.
Yeah.
Were Jess and Otto from rescue centres? What was the kind of setup of how you got them?
No, so we rehomed them both from homes where they were ostensibly loved, but people weren't able to look after them anymore. So Jess was bred to be a working dog, but got the sack and was essentially like living in a cage outdoors by herself for the first nearly 4 years of her life. And Otto was being shown. He was a crafts boy, but he was very fearful of being handled, and he was in a home with another dog he wasn't getting on with, and he needed a new situation. It's not a way that I would advise anybody to go about getting a dog. We've got it wrong twice now, and the ramifications have been huge for our lives. And yeah.
Okay. So when was the point then so you mentioned that you were kind of a year in with Jess, and at what point then did you think that you needed, I don't know, some external help maybe, or how did you go about equipping yourself with that knowledge?
So we realized that quite early on, that we needed some help with her training. The biggest issue for us was separation anxiety. So we've had Jess for 5 years. We've never cracked this nut. So we have never left her on her own, which means that one of us is tied to her 100% of the time.
Wow.
So that was the first thing that came up, where we were like, okay, we really need some help dealing with this. We knew that walking out and leaving her in distress wasn't an option. And we worked with a trainer called Becca Somerville, Behaviour by Becca, she's called, and she's a Sighthound specialist who happened to be in our area. We were in a very Sighthound dense area, so I think we found her through, somebody we were walking with at the park, say, and she was great, had lots of specialist knowledge, and really helped us.
Okay. So what was your experience like then of going and getting that support from her? Did you kind of, that whole process of that initial conversation with her, how did she come and work with you, and what did you take away from that?
I imagine we probably began talking through Instagram.
Okay.
Perhaps in the days before I had an account for Jess, but where I was kind of beginning to immerse myself in this sort of Sighthound community, and doing a bit more of my own learning and research. We filled out a long questionnaire, had a couple of conversations with her, and then she came around to our house and really showed us what we needed to do in terms of our own sort of behaviour. And the best thing we got out of it, we never cracked the separation anxiety. We really struggled to sort of commit to the schedule that we needed to. But we can now cut her nails, all thanks to Becca, which is a massive win as far as
Amazing.
And how long did you work with Becca for?
Not very long, because we moved out of London during the pandemic, so only a couple of sessions probably. But we've since worked with a couple more trainers on longer term bases. We've always had somebody that we can reach out to, so somebody that we're kind of working with in an intensive or a sort of softer way.
Yeah. Okay. And what has been your approach to finding those trainers and behaviourists then? Has there been a specific pull from their messaging, or just tell us a little bit about the process that you've adopted to try and find help?
we've always found help, I think, through community, through recommendations from other people. I used to work for Dogs for Good, who train assistance dogs. So the second person we trained with, I found through Dogs for Good. She used to train assistance dogs and now has her own training business. And then our current trainer, Rachel Welch, who's brilliant, was a recommendation. And it turns out has trained loads of people locally who we know and love. So
yeah, amazing. And how does it feel having that, I suppose, that little hop around between different trainers? Is that something that you've actively sought out? So obviously you mentioned that you had the move the first time, which is why you didn't stay with that one. But then is there any reason why one particular person hasn't kind of stuck, or what's kind of been your thought process around that?
That was another move. So at the moment we've been training with Rachel for say maybe 6 or 7 months and have no plans to change. I think consistency is really great for us, and somebody who can get to know this sort of our dogs' personalities because they're so specific. So yeah, that was sort of through circumstance and moving around the country.
And did you know then that when you started working with her that there was that opportunity to go long term? And if you knew, great. And if it was somebody who was only offering you like a 1 or 2 session type offering, would that have changed your mind as to whether you'd worked with that person?
It would, under those circumstances, because by then we'd had Otto for 2 or 3 months, and we knew that we had like quite an extreme case on our hands and that we needed some really robust support. So we were sort of assembling a SWAT team. We've got a really great vet. So the first thing we did with Rachel was have a phone call with her and then book a set of 10 sessions up front, and really commit to like a routine with that, and make sure that for us it's like a really important part of the infrastructure at the moment, because we struggle so much with our dogs. It's such an emotional thing for us as well as for them, and we know that the only way that we can kind of manage it is with really good support.
Yeah, I love that. I think the support aspect is something that's so crucial. So when you say support, what type of support really works for you in terms of having that professional on board? Because like you say, it's emotionally draining, isn't it, when you've got dogs with all of these struggles and the impact on your life? So what type of support has really helped you and your family get through this journey?
So with Rachel, we've done 2 things. One is sort of hour or half-hour long sessions with her, which we either do in person or over Zoom. And the other one is we joined one of her Zoom training classes and did a sort of entry-level training program with both of our dogs. The thing that I find the most valuable is rather than active training, because of where Otto's at the moment, there's like very little. He's sort of it's a very fearful dog. He's not trusting of us, so like the bond isn't really there to do meaningful training with him. We're just trying to work out how to coexist with him and make him as comfortable as we can at the moment. That's what we're striving for. There isn't much beyond that. So the most useful thing has been having these conversations where we can describe his behavior to Rachel and what we're doing, and how our interactions are, and having somebody there who's a sounding board, who kind of, she's very kind, she's very validating, and yeah, I think it makes us feel more confident in the ways that we interact with him, and yeah, just a bit more relaxed about the whole thing, knowing that there's somebody there who's got that really expert knowledge. We sometimes, if there's a new behavior or something we're not sure about, we're struggling to read his body language, we might send her a video and she'll come back to us and say, I think what's happening is this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I suppose then something that stuck out to me whilst you was talking then was that a lot of these are on Zoom. So there is I don't know if you could call it like a misconception, or if there's a little bit of fear from the professional side of it, or there's a strong desire that people want to go more into Zoom or online offerings and what have you. But there's this inner voice from the professional side. And I'd be lying if I said that I didn't have it at one point.
I've had it, yeah.
To go, it's not like people don't want Zoom consults. They need you to see the dog. That's what everybody wants. And I think it's such an ingrained feeling. Arguably, even if you are doing amazing online, I still think there is an ingrained feeling there that people, massive generalization, people want a dog trainer, behaviourist, whatever the profession, to come in and see the dog. What has your views been on that? Is that something that has your view on that changed because of the type of dogs that you've got? Or did you kind of start off thinking, no, I need somebody to come and see this? I'm always just curious when people have got dogs like this and they're in this situation. It's like, what's your thought process and journey been with that?
So I think the majority of our training started in the pandemic. We only had Jess for about a year before we went into lockdown. So that then everything was over Zoom and there wasn't really like an option. We did have a few in-person sessions, but it was just easier and more practical to do things over Zoom. So we started doing it that way. And I find that a mixture is really nice. If you think about how we're working with Rachel, we're sort of occasionally WhatsApping, she's looking at photos and videos. We've done some outdoor sessions where, she can see things in person. We've done Zoom sessions where we can show her the whole room at once. And so I feel like she's not really missing anything between all of those. I feel really well supported by that as a model. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. And I suppose it's a harder question to answer because of the situation you found yourself in. But if the pandemic hadn't have been there, what do you think you would have been looking for in a trainer? Do you think you would have lent more toward needing or wanting, I should say, the in-person over the online?
Hard to say. That might have been what we'd look for by default if we didn't have other options. But actually, like Jess, my Whippet, is quite suspicious of new people. It's hard to bring new people into the home. There's a certain amount of build-up that needs to happen and stuff. So I think this would have ended up being the more practical solution for us.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's just really interesting, isn't it? When you are you're thrown into these situations and then it's how you deal with it. But what's your view then? Because I suppose you're kind of thrown into dog world a little bit more then since you've become the opposable thumbs. I'm going to stick. I like this. It's
stealing that.
So since you've become the opposable thumbs behind Worried Whippet and everything, you're involved in dog world a little bit more. So what is it that you are finding now being in that content world of surrounded by loads of dog guardians? What do you think their thoughts are of our profession really as trainers and behaviourists?
I don't know. I think the majority of people that I know with difficult dogs, because that's sort of where I found myself, as people with dogs with challenges, are actively working with people in whatever part of your profession, trainers mostly, but clinical behaviourists, vets, whatever. I think there's a lot of active contact between people and professionals. In terms of perspectives, I don't know. I see a lot of vet bashing. I hate vet bashing. I see a lot of that. I don't see the same sort of hostility towards trainers and behaviourists. If anything, I just wish that more people were kind of engaging with that kind of support.
And I'm guessing that being as kind of out there as you are and being really honest, and I follow you on Instagram and I love I love everything about you. And I found you through the love of Sighthounds, actually. So do you now get people who ask you for training and behaviour advice?
Yes.
And how do you deal with that?
I get people who say things that I think, I get a lot of questions about, my dogs were on medication. Since I've been talking about that, a lot of questions about medication. I always tell people that it's so specific. Like the things that my dogs are dealing with are so specific. There is nothing I could tell you that would help you in the situation you're in. And actually, in a moment of desperation, of couple of months ago, I posted something and I said, because we were trying to, with our dog Otto, we were trying to work out what shape our days should take to best support him. So I made a post and I said, people with Italian Greyhounds, like, how much exercise are you giving your Italian Greyhounds? When are you walking them, et cetera, because I'm having these problems with my Iggy and can you help? And I was reading this morning, the comments underneath that post, and they were all great and well-meaning, but 0 of them were helpful. I had a meeting with a clinical behaviourist last night. I now know that any of that advice was completely useless to me because it just wasn't tailored to the situation I was in, and it wasn't coming from people who understood the experiences of my dog. So yeah, it's very, very difficult. And I think we all, especially in like desperate moments, look to the wrong places. And if you want to know like how to cope with living with a difficult dog from your own perspective, then by all means, look at my content, talk to me. Like, I can talk to you about that human side of things, but I can't tell you anything about your dog's behavior. I can barely read my own dog's behavior. Yeah.
So what do you tend to, do you have like a generic response that you would say to people in that? Yeah. If they're asking you some sort of training and behavior help?
I mean, normally if it's behavioral, I say talk to a vet.
Yeah.
I think in our experience, like the vet is a really good first port of call if you're having behavioral issues, and then trainer and clinical behaviours second, especially because some of the behaviours are brought on by things that need medical attention before you can then try and manage them behaviourally. So yeah, talk to your vet. That's my line.
And are you part of other groups with, I'm guessing the answer is yes, when you tend to have a breed, and especially like Sighthounds, because there are lots of groups around, aren't there? Do you get the same thing happening in those groups? Maybe not directed at you, but do you get questions flying around and people are quite freely giving their advice, again, that might not be tailored to that poster's specific circumstance?
Yeah, absolutely. I do see a lot of that. I've actually pulled back from, I used to be in a lot of Facebook groups. I found that rather than giving me clarity on things, everything felt a bit more confusing. So I don't hang out in those spaces anymore, but I do follow a lot of other Sighthounds on Instagram, and I am watching what other people are doing and sort of learning from other people. But when it comes to behavior, like, we've learned the hard way that you have to go straight to the professionals and get yourself some really robust support.
Yeah. So from your opinion then, what do you think professionals could be doing more of to help the public? Because like you say, there are lots of people. And again, I think we'd all be lying if we said none of us have done this. We've gone into those groups where we know they're not the right people to ask for support. We all do, don't we? Like, I've got kids as well. And the amount of times you still sense check some of these groups and go, oh, look, this thing's just happened. Like, go see a doctor. Stop asking. Stop asking in Facebook. Like, social media is not the right place. But from a professional side of it, what do you think we could be doing more as a profession to support people like yourselves with dogs that have got these issues, so that the public are coming to us as the professionals more than those groups?
I think making your own content, that's how I find people, and just demonstrating really gently. I think it's often less about like involving yourself in conversations. I know that there are some trainers out there who take quite like a polemical approach and maybe caught a bit of controversy and stuff, and that really puts me off. I think just sort of gently demonstrating the right ways to do things is that's the nicest sort of content that I find and engage with, and makes me feel safe to give it a little follow and join in.
Yeah, I love it. No, it is really good. It's stuff that we're always talking about, isn't it? Going like, you need to share your side of things and let people get to know you as an individual as well, because that's ultimately what, but we've literally recently done an episode on how if we can't figure out who's behind the account, I suppose, like who are the people like posting all of this stuff, you need to be able to connect with that person and go, oh, actually, I feel like you could be someone worth having a conversation with to see if you can work for me and slot in with the lifestyle that we're trying to do as well.
Yeah, definitely. And this is something why I love your account so much, is because there's a lot of you on there, and you're talking about the dogs, but you're also talking about your experience with living with those difficult dogs. And we sort of had a bit of a pre-conversation about, struggles, like in the industry that we're in, there's a lot of people who have sort of mental health struggles, and they're trying to do all the things and they're trying to juggle too many plates, and it just becomes really overwhelming. And, I think you're quite open about your mental health as well, aren't you, Jess? And do you find that, I'm guessing you get a lot of people reach out to you about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the impact that these dogs have had on the sort of practicalities of our day-to-day life in our home, but also on my mental health, is massive. Can't be understated. The amount that I can go outside, the sort of freedoms that I have, the amount that I can see my friends, all of that is dictated by these dogs. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. There's a lot of focus on the dogs and their needs and their behavior, and that's crucially important. But also, how can you look after yourself if you're in a situation that's really intense with your dog, if it's very demanding, if it's limiting your life in certain ways, which, are all true for me, then I think focusing on supporting yourself as well is really important, because if you're under-resourced, then you're not going to be able to do your best for your dog. It can be a really tricky balance to strike.
Yeah. And also we find that a lot of dog professionals actually take on of their clients' problems. And so that kind of, you almost like could find that somebody works with you and then takes all of your problems and your dog's problems on themselves, and then like it eats them up, doesn't it? So we do find this is a big thing in the industry, actually, is that people don't have that balance of being able to, not that you should just be able to switch off completely to it, but you've got to have that balance right. And I guess, again, it's hard to even start talking about these things in the very first place, isn't it? So I bet the first time you actually opened up to you've got, how many followers on Instagram have you got? A lot.
100 and something thousand across the accounts.
Yeah. So that's a lot of people to be vulnerable with, isn't it? So that very first time you sort of talked about it, I bet was quite scary. And so again, with these dog professionals, I think sometimes it's better to just be open and honest. And that's easy for me to say, I guess, sat here just saying that. But I think, again, if you've got a client that can relate to that in some way and go, okay, you are this dog professional, you're still a human being, and you've still got these, relatable things as well. That wouldn't, I'm guessing as a client, that wouldn't put you off working with somebody. No.
100% no. Really not. I find that on a personal level. So for a long time, I was sharing Jess's concerns in like a comical, lighthearted way on her account. And I wasn't really talking about, I was talking about her worries, which she does have worries. But I wasn't talking about like the sort of trauma of it for her and the really complicated, ugly, gritty stuff that was actually going on in our lives. And I only started doing that about 18 months ago, I think. And it was really, really hard to open up about it. And I had an Instagram account that I'd been running for years where I'd been talking about her like fears. But to talk about the impact that was having on our lives, the limitations, sometimes I feel embarrassed that for 5 years we haven't gone to the supermarket together without booking a dog sitter for our dog. Those things are really difficult to talk about, and you do open yourself up to judgment. But actually, I find that often the judgment doesn't come. People are much kinder than I think they're going to be. And when I share something that is difficult to share and where I have to really put my feelings on the line, I always feel better afterwards. Like it takes a lot, it's like an exorcism, but I always feel better afterwards. And I always find that there are people out there who are telling me that they feel the same way. And that's incredibly valuable to me. So I think sharing something very human even if it feels unpolished and imperfect, is a great way to connect with people. And that will be the same if you're trying to connect with potential clients, if you're trying to connect with peers and colleagues, whoever. I think that people really appreciate that vulnerability.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
I love that. And there's a few things that came up in that for me that, I mean, have you had any kind of backlash or any kind of negative comments with, I was going to say, if you haven't with 100,000 followers, what are you doing? So
I have.
what type of, what type of negativity have you had from it? Because it's very brave to put yourself out there, and it's something that, you know, we absolutely applaud. So how do you deal with the negativity that comes with it?
I mean, I find it really difficult. I find it really hard. And I don't know if it gets any easier. Like when you listen to people who've been sharing things on social media for a long time, they still find it really difficult.
Yeah.
So I'm not expecting that to necessarily become any easier, but I just try and breathe through it. I share it. I make light of it if I can. Sometimes I choose to respond. Sometimes I choose not to. I've started to get more boundaried in terms of things that I ask people not to do. I've started explicitly asking people not to give me advice, because I found that whenever I was talking about something, a challenge I was having with my dogs, I would get tons of advice underneath it. And it would all say things like, have you tried XYZ supplement? And like, we're so far beyond that. My dogs are on 3 different anxiety medications each. Like, it's not helpful, and it makes me feel like small, and like people think I'm not trying the most basic things. You know, it's just not good for you to get unsolicited advice in the thousands every month. So I've started being really clear in my content and saying, please don't give me advice about this, which really helps, because usually people do it. You're always going to get negative stuff, and I always find it upsetting. And especially, you know, I think the dog community is increasingly divisive. There's a lot of different opinions on things, and not everybody agrees with the way that I approach it. And that's okay, but they don't always express it very kindly. I just think it's something you have to accept. And it's so radically outweighed by the positive experiences of being part of this community online.
Yeah, it's do you know what? There's so many ways I want to continue this conversation, because ultimately there's lots of similarities between you being on, from our point of view, you're on like the client end of it, and then we're doing the professional bit, and everything that you've just said about wanting to share this message and it being divisive and all of that happens on our side of it as well. So I think I don't know if it's comforting or not, but to know that it's happening on the other side as well. So we almost think that this is just happening in our world, whereas actually you are essentially our clients in this scenario. Like, you're the person with the dog that's got a struggle, and you're putting your message out there, and you're still finding it divisive with peers from the public doing the same thing. But the thing that I almost want to link it back to is that, for me, it feels like you've got a really nice, strong purpose. So you know why you're sharing this content and why you're doing it, and that's why you continue to do it. So we had a bit of a pre-conversation as well, didn't we? And something that you are really keen on is to be able to support the breeds of dog that you've got and share a bit more awareness about those. So do you want to tell us about that? Because I think that is a really lovely purpose for you, and I think it will resonate with a lot of people as well.
Yeah, so I have Sighthounds, which are obviously predisposed to anxiety. So I find that amongst the people we've met in real life and online in this community, most of them are struggling with an anxious dog. So it feels really nice to connect in that way and to share all of the joys that are specific to these breeds and their quirks and the reasons we love them so much, but also to be able to kind of commiserate together about the difficulties that they're having. And there are so many similarities. They're such lovely dogs. They can be a bit neurotic, but so can the best of us.
Indeed, indeed. So what's your kind of goal moving forwards then on how you can help people with these breeds of dog?
Honestly, I mostly think about, I don't have any kind of lofty missions. Like I definitely am not qualified to help people in any way beyond giving them a space to talk about it. And that's where the value is for me, is being able to share and be listened to and to listen in return. The conversations, my favorite conversations happen not in public on my channels, but in my inbox and my DMs, where it just feels so valuable to connect with people with a similar experience. And my audience helps me as much as, or I'm sure more than I help them. So it's selfish in lots of ways, but my plan is just to keep sharing as and when I have an experience to share.
But I guess from what you said near the beginning was that you came into, when you first got Jess, your eyes weren't open to the enormity of the issues. And then subsequently with Otto, it's even heightened, isn't it? So I think that from hearing what you're saying, and I know Joe will agree with this, that you're doing so much to help somebody that might be thinking about getting a dog, but maybe hasn't, you said you did your breed research and all that is great, but it's the enormity of what you're taking on, isn't it? So I guess from my point of view, like you probably don't think that you're doing as much as you are really to get people thinking about it in that kind of way. Because if you can give somebody as much information as potentially this could be a problem, and not kind of just putting a downer on every Sighthound's going to have this problem, but like it's a huge awareness that you're bringing to people. So I don't think you should play that down at all. That's what I'm saying.
No, those 100,000 followers are receiving amazing content from you. And like you say, it's that connectability. It's what everybody needs to know that there is somebody out there for them to just be heard and have that space to feel safe to share.
Yeah. And it's not Sighthound specific either, because, we work with people on a long-term basis, and some of our clients are literally just, like a sounding board. You like a bit of therapy, and some of the sessions, in fact, a lot of the sessions we do are not practical training. It's listening and it's helping and it's trying to figure out, like I was with a lady last week and we were trying to figure out, she was losing momentum. So I would come round and there'd be a 2-week gap and she'd be great for the first 3 days. And then she was like, Vicky, I'm being really honest, like it drops off. It's nothing you're doing. It's nothing about the training. And I was like, is it all achievable? Is it stuff that, you can do? And she's like, yeah, it's just I lose the momentum. So we were sort of drilling down into how can we make that easier for her? How can we? And we landed on like journal, a sort of a diary, sort of daily diary thing. And she first of all was like, oh my gosh, no, that's too much. And then we broke it down into little bullet points. And she was like, yeah. And then she brings out a book for me that she'd been doing when they were puppies. And she'd been writing down every single day what time they toileted, what time they played, what time they slept. So she'd already been doing it. So for her, it was like, do you know what? This chat has been like the most useful thing in the world. So, and I'm guessing that's what you get a lot out of your sessions.
Yeah. I'm probably a nightmare client because I cry every single time.
Oh, no, we get this a lot.
Yeah. No,
a lot of waterwork, because you're kind of releasing, you build up so much stress and overwhelm. And I'm so focused on like not letting that show at home and get the best of me. But then when you talk to someone, it does just come.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And it's not just talking to anyone, it's someone who knows exactly where you're coming from and they're completely empathetic of everything that you're going through, and they just understand, I guess, don't they? So, in terms of it being that right person, because the way we look at this is that people aren't just we need to make sure that we're a good fit for the client as well as the other way around. So as much as it's important for you to find that you work well with us, we need to make sure that we work well with you as well. Because for situations like you're in, imagine that we just didn't have that connection. You're not going to take on the advice, and we're not going to feel like the advice is being, landed right. So it's so important, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah.
And would you ever feel like if things weren't going right for you with the person that you were working with, do you feel like you would be strong enough to sort of say, do something about it, for example, or say to the person that this isn't working, or would you just like, how would you approach that actually?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if it's not working, it's not benefiting us, them, the dogs, then, that's not a relationship that's worth maintaining. We haven't had that problem yet. We really love our training setup at the moment. We have had things where, like you've just described, where we really struggle with the consistency. It's why we've never made headway on the separation anxiety thing, because it requires so much consistency over such a long period of time. So we're constantly trying to find workarounds for that. And we try and be very honest. And if we're not holding up our end of the bargain and doing the work, then we try and be honest about that.
Yeah, it's one thing that I think is worth exploring as well. So you've mentioned already that, you've been doing this journey for quite a while and you've had that training support alongside. Now, from a trainer's point of view, I am pretty certain that there are people out there listening now going, oh my God, I would be absolutely mortified if I was working with a client for 5 years and they haven't seen a result in something. And that, do you know what I mean? Like that fear bit comes in of all this imposter syndrome of like, oh my God, I must just be a bit shit, or I must not be very good. And maybe they're thinking it and they're not saying it. What would you say to the trainers out there listening that are scared of working with people long term in thinking that they're not going to be able to, I say air quote, fix the problem?
I think I
love the smile on your face with this, by the way.
Yeah.
I feel really strongly about this, right? Because to begin with, most of the reasons that we don't make progress with our dogs are in two camps, right? One is that we are not consistent. One of them's at the door. I'm sorry, he's going to bark if I don't let him in.
No, go for it.
You do edit this, right? Because
yeah.
Should I start again? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
So most of the time, if we're not seeing the result with our dogs, it's because we're not putting in the consistency. Like we just aren't able to establish the routine that we need to carry through. Like change doesn't happen overnight. We need 3 months of runway to make a real difference in most instances. The other reason that we're not seeing progress with our dogs, or we're not seeing results as you describe it, is that they just aren't capable at the moment. Like we're having to make a lot of changes with things like medication to be able to do the smallest things. Like Otto, we haven't managed to get a sit out of him yet. Been a year. And that's all because of his brain. Like he's got so much going on. He's just not in a position to learn things like that. The trust isn't there. And that's what we're working on building. So for me, the soft gains have been enormous. And that's like us feeling supported. That's us understanding more about our own behavior and how that can impact them, making changes to our environment, and just enjoying their company more and feeling supported. Like that has been radical for us this year. And we would be in a very different position without it. Whether or not Otto can do a sit is neither here nor there. Like he's got much bigger mountains he has to climb first. So I just don't think it's a reflection on our trainer or that relationship or anything. I think there are much more important things that we're learning.
I love that. I think that's such an important message for people to hear.
Yeah, the results aren't always obviously tangible.
Yeah. And do you think, and again, it's possibly a little bit of a loaded question unintentionally, but do you think that that's because, in your opinion, the way that you've tackled this journey is very much about, it's from that place of wanting to educate yourself more and have more of an understanding? Because I'm certain there'll be people out there listening going, yeah, but she's like the dream client. She's the person that everybody would love to work with because she wants to understand and can take it at the dog's pace and all of that. But there's bound to be people out there that are going, well, sorry, you haven't, like, I've hired you to do this and you haven't fixed it. And yeah, it's more of a, I don't know, what do you think on those situations? Do you think that you are just a bit of a unique person out there, or?
I think those people need their expectations managed. And I think that's maybe part of that is, as a trainer, like trying to manage those expectations up front. But a larger part of it is the conversations that we're having, say, online and in these bigger like community spaces, to make sure that like quality of life for our dogs is at the middle of those conversations, and that we've had to lower our expectations a million times over the last 5 years in terms of what we can achieve with our dogs and what they'll be like. And I think the more we have conversations about why we have those expectations as a society, like whether they're serving us, whether they're serving the dogs, I think increasingly people's attitudes will change with that.
Yeah, that's great. What a great message to end on as well. So no, thank you ever so much, Jess, for coming on board. It's been really eye-opening, hasn't it?
Yeah.
To see it from the opposite side of the fence, quite literally.
Yeah.
So thank you ever so much for your time.
If people want to find out more about you, Jess, where do they go?
They can find me on Instagram. My handles are worried whippet and human.jess. And they can also find my book on Amazon or in their local bookshops. It's called Worried Whippet with Bravery.
And you've also got a podcast, haven't you?
I do. Brave Whippet podcast, not dog related, but a lovely podcast if you want something to listen to that's going to make you feel braver than before you turned it on.
Yeah, it's very good. I listen to your podcast. It's good. And we've got one last question for you before you go.
Yes, we do. Who do you think we should interview on our podcast next that would help our listeners?
From my side of things, somebody who really influenced me is Hannah Simpson in Macbeth Illustration, who also talks about difficult dogs and rescues and has a fantastic community of difficult dog guardians that I'm sure that your listeners would love to reach.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you ever so much again. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Jess.